What's up guys, Nuno from Globe to Trot here, and today we are going to talk time lapses. We are not only going to talk, but I'm going to give you a step-by-step process so that you can start nailing those smooth and perfect time lapses. So without further ado, let's go to step 1. You've got to get the right gear. I know you've heard so many times that gear doesn't matter, but there's some essential gear that without you cannot do time-lapse photography. For instance, you need a tripod or any stable surface where to lay your camera. You can do it without the tripod, but it's going to limit a lot your creativity. Second thing you need is an intervalometer like this one. An intervalometer is something that is going to let you control your camera and define what's the interval you want for each shoot and how long you want each shoot to be. So this is a must. There are some cameras that have a built-in intervalometer, but most of them don't. I'll leave in the description some links so that you can find something like this. So you don't have to buy a very expensive one, the cheapest ones will do just fine. Another accessory I highly recommend is an ND filter like this one. This is a variable ND filter, but you can use whichever you want. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do a video or a blog post about ND filters and the various ND filters available and what's their differences. Enough of camera gear, let's go to step 2. Set your camera to RAW. RAW is going to give you the most flexibility possible in post-processing so that you can get back those lost highlights or shadow. Against my advice, if you still decide to shoot in JPEG, at least define a fixed white balance. If you shoot in automatic white balance, the color might change during your shoot and that will give you an inconsistent end result. Just with white balance, you must take control of your exposure. Otherwise, the camera may decide for a different exposure for each photo, what in the end is going to give you again an inconsistent result. So you are going to set your camera to manual, and that is step 3. Lots of people are afraid of manual mode, but in fact it couldn't be easier to decide on your settings. The first thing you are going to decide is your ISO, and it's quite easy. You are going to set it to the minimum in most of the time, because it's with the minimum ISO that you are going to get less noise in your pictures, so a better result. After, you have to decide on your aperture, and you are going to decide on that depending on the depth of field you want your photo to have. So if you want a time-lapse with a small depth of field, you are going to choose a wide aperture, so a small f-stop number. If you want a big depth of field, you are going to choose a small aperture. That means a big f-stop number, so f11, f16, something like that. A pro tip is that your camera might be a bit inconsistent if you choose a very small aperture, because the diaphragm, it has to open and to close in every photo, and when it closes sometimes it won't hit exactly the same place, so that is going to give you slight different exposures between pictures. So if you are using an automatic lens, probably is better to use wider apertures to give you the better result. But you have to try with your gear. It's probably going to be different than mine. I'm using a manual lens to do time lapses, so I don't have that problem. So you've set your ISO and your aperture. It's missing your shutter speed. Shutter speed is the most important setting in a time lapse, so it is going to deserve a step on its own. Before, we have to decide something else, the interval we are going to shoot with, and that brings us to step 4. How you are going to decide what interval to use for your time-lapse? It's very easy. For a fast-moving subject, you are going to need a shorter interval, and for a slow-moving subject, you are going to need a longer interval. As a rule of thumb, you can use 1 second for moving traffic, 1 to 2 seconds for moving crowds and fast-moving clouds, and 2 to 3 seconds for slow-moving clouds. If you want to capture stars, you will want to use a much longer interval, like 15 to 60 seconds. So this is when you are going to need an intervalometer. So I'm giving away this one. If you want to win it, make sure to like this video, subscribe the channel, and read in the description what you have to do to win it. Now that you have liked this video and subscribed the channel, let's go to step 5. Drag the shutter. Dragging the shutter is the most important thing to improve the quality of your time lapses and to get that smooth, blurred movement. You have to do this to avoid the staccato effect. The staccato effect is what happens in those ugly time lapses where you see people jumping from a frame to another, and that happens because movement is indeed frozen in each frame. The idea of slowing the shutter is that you are going to blur movement in each frame, and that is going to help make the transition from a frame to another, what is going to get you in the end a very smooth result. It is very easy to decide what is the shutter speed that you are going to use for each frame. As a rule of thumb, you should use a shutter speed that is half the interval that you are shooting. Let me explain. If previously decided that you want to shoot at a 1 second interval, you are going to set your shutter speed to half a second. If you decided to use an interval of 2 seconds, then you are going to use the shutter speed of 1 second. It's that easy. So this is why you are going to need an ND filter, because in bright sunlight it is impossible to get these shutter speeds without overexposing your image. You might well be able to do it during the night or in a dark place, but during the day, forget it. You are not going to do it without an ND filter. Now that you have your camera settings right, you are ready to set your focus. One thing you want to do is to set your focus first and then turn it to manual. Don't leave it automatic, otherwise it will surely change between pictures and the final result, you are not going to like it. That was step 6, let's go to step 7. Take some test shots. Last thing you want is to take pictures for an hour just to discover in the end that all the pictures were out of focus. So take some 5 to 10 test shots and see the result. If it is fine, now start your time lapse. Step 8, know the duration of your time lapse and shoot accordingly. Now that you started shooting your time lapse, just lay back and wait for it to be completed. Take in mind that probably you are going to export this video afterwards in 24 frames per second. That's the cinematic frame rate. So you'll need 24 photos for 1 second of video. Usually you should try to shoot at least 5 to 10 seconds worth of video, so that will make 120 to 240 photos. So in the same way, you have to have in mind your interval. If you are going to take 240 photos for 1 second, that's 240 seconds. But if you are going to take 240 photos with an interval of 60 seconds, that's 4 hours. So be ready. And that's it, guys. This is my 8-step process to get smooth, beautiful, perfect time lapses. Have in mind that with all this technical knowledge you will be able to. Just don't forget, as in photography, composition is king. So you have to try to get a good composition even before you think of starting a time lapse. Otherwise, a time lapse of a crappy subject with a crappy composition will never be good. Sorry for the sound quality. In the center of Paris it's not easy to get a quiet place. Hope you liked this video. Please, if you did, give me a thumbs up, subscribe the channel, and leave in the comments if you want more tutorials like this. This was the first one, so they are surely going to get better. Subscribe and we'll see each other on the next video.